You're tired, I know. The world you carry feels heavier each night. But there was a time when people knew how to lay it down. When the cold came early and the light fell quickly, they didn't fight it. They accepted it. They built their peace from darkness and silence. They had no blue screens, no clocks, no endless lists demanding more. Only fire, breath, and the pulse of the earth beneath the floorboards. And somehow they rested, better than any of us ever have. The wind outside howled against the timber walls, a sound so old it might have belonged to another species of air. Inside, the glow of a single hearth flickered across wooden beams blackened by years of smoke. That smoke wasn't a nuisance. It was insulation, warmth, memory itself pressed into the walls. Every breath rose silver, caught in the amber shimmer of firelight, then vanished into the dark above. Children murmured in their sleep, wrapped in sheep wool and rough linen. A man's arm curved around his wife's shoulders beneath a bearskin. The low snort of a horse came from the stall across the partition. The rhythm of life even in rest. The air was thick with smoke, pine resin, and the faint sweetness of stored hay. No sound came from outside, but the snow was whispering against the door. The world beyond that door had frozen solid, but here it still breathed. For the people of the Viking North, this moment wasn't idleness, it was sacred. The hour when the world stopped demanding, when survival softened into stillness. We treat sleep as surrender. They treated it as worship. They lived in rhythm with something greater, not clocks but cosmos. When night fell, they fell with it. Their longhouses were more than shelter. They were worlds in miniature. The floor was packed with clay and straw, the roof lined with driftwood and moss, the walls thick with turf that muffled the wind. Each design held the logic of centuries. Every beam placed not for beauty, but endurance. And at the centre of it all burned a hearth, a slow and patient fire. It was their sun through the endless winter. To rest by that fire was to feel the pulse of creation itself. The flicker of the flame was a language, a heartbeat, a guardian. Every home carried its fire from the old year into the new, just as every generation carried memory forward. To let it die was shameful. To keep it alive was duty. When the embers dimmed, someone always rose. That was love. Wordless, instinctive, constant. The Norse didn't name this rhythm. They lived it. What we call biphasic sleep, waking once in the night then returning to rest, was their normal. It wasn't an interruption. It was a conversation. The still hour between first sleep and second was when thought became clarity. They used it to tend the fire, mend a strap, whisper prayers to Frigg, or speak softly to the one beside them. It was a pause without anxiety, a space for peace. Modern science has rediscovered that rhythm. We know now that humans are wired for 2 sleeps, that melatonin peaks twice when we live by firelight. We know that this natural waking calms the mind, steadies the heartbeat, resets the nervous system. The Vikings didn't measure it, they trusted it. They didn't name the hormone, they knew the feeling. They called it balance. Imagine a winter night in northern Norway 1,000 years ago. The world outside is a white desert. Auroras bend across the sky like rivers of green fire. A single window of the longhouse glows with orange light. Inside, the air hums with quiet life. Breathing, crackling, the shuffle of straw beneath wool. The fire pops and sparks rise like stars to join the ones outside. That's how the Norse world survived darkness, by folding into it instead of resisting it. Every living thing shared the warmth. People, dogs, livestock. Even the rafters held heat, radiating it back in the small hours. The smell of pine pitch and iron hung thick, the fragrance of both life and endurance. Their world wasn't sterile, it was intimate. It healed through closeness. They didn't sleep alone in separate rooms, they slept as one organism. Body heat mingled, breathing synchronized. Infants nested near the centre where it was warmest. Elders took the outer edges, protecting the young. Each body, each breath had its place in the architecture of survival. That closeness bred trust deeper than speech. Archaeologists at Borg and Stung uncovered longhouses that still bear traces of this design. Ash layers marking years of fire. Wooden benches raised just high enough to catch the rising warmth. Animal pens beyond thin walls of wattle and hide. Even the layout itself, long, narrow, pulsing toward the hearth, mirrored the human body. Head, heart, breath, flame. To step into that space was to enter the anatomy of life itself. The house and the body were one. You didn't sleep in the longhouse. You became part of it. And because of that, sleep wasn't just rest, it was communion. A nightly merging with everything that kept you alive. We've forgotten that kind of intimacy. We built walls so thick that silence turned hollow. We filled nights with noise to drown what we feared in stillness. The Vikings didn't fear silence. They listened to it. They believed the night had its own voice and that fire translated its language. When you watch flame long enough, thought slows. The eyes soften. The breath matches the flicker. They didn't know about brainwaves, but they knew trance. A deep state where worry melted, where the body remembered its own design. They reached it through stillness, not effort. Through surrender, not struggle. That's why their rest was deeper than ours. They didn't fight sleep. They followed it. They didn't chase dreams. They trusted them. Their bodies aligned with the rhythm of flame, their minds aligned with the rhythm of wind, and in that alignment, peace was inevitable. We build artificial suns and wonder why we can't sleep. We surround ourselves with brightness and call it safety. But the Vikings understood the gift of dark, how it heals the eyes, calms the mind, lets the body drift towards stillness. The night wasn't something to endure, it was something to honour. Some scholars call the Viking winter the inward season, a time when the world itself seemed to breathe slower, when the mind turned inward and silence became sacred. They accepted that shift without guilt. Their gods demanded effort, but they also demanded rest. When the snow trapped them indoors, they didn't see imprisonment, they saw reprieve. A time to mend nets, to carve spoons, to tell stories until the mind quieted. The long dark wasn't punishment. It was permission. The body slowed, the spirit deepened, and sleep came not from fatigue, but gratitude. Every night was a small ceremony. The hearth banked low, a final bowl of broth shared. The children curled closer. The adults whispered thanks for warmth, for breath, for one more night alive. Then silence settled like a blanket. Listen long enough, and you can hear that silence even now, the faint hum of memory that lives in every fire. We've been burning wood for 1,000,000 years, and somewhere in that glow, our ancestors still wait. They're not asking us to return to their world, only to remember it, to remember how it felt to rest without fear. Because rest isn't luxury, it's lineage. It's the oldest code we ever learned and the first one we forgot. The Vikings didn't conquer their nights. They befriended them. They let darkness teach them gentleness. They let sleep teach them faith. Faith that the fire would last. Faith that morning would return. Faith that the body, given stillness, knows how to heal itself. That faith, more than sword or ship, was what kept them alive. Because every night they surrendered, and every dawn they rose reborn. When you think about it, the first lesson of their world isn't conquest, it's surrender. Not to weakness, but to rhythm. To the endless pulse that connects flame, flesh and sky. That was their real fire. And it's still waiting for us to learn again. Still burning, beneath everything we've built. If this world feels peaceful to you, stay by the fire. The next code begins soon, but before it does, close your eyes for a moment. Listen to the wind outside, you don't have to fight it. The fire's been waiting for you. The first code was warmth. The simple truth that to survive the night, you had to make peace with it. In the next chapter, we'll step closer to that fire and learn how the Vikings turned heat into healing. The first code was warmth. The simple truth that to survive the night, you had to make peace with it. The Vikings didn't just build fires, they built worlds around them. Every spark inside a longhouse was a promise that life would last until morning. The hearth wasn't simply a tool, it was a living heart, pulsing light through walls of pine and turf. and every family guarded it like a god, because without it, they were only a few breaths away from death. A Viking never returned home to darkness. They stepped into a breathing world of smoke and whispers, the longhouse alive with the sound of burning wood. You could hear the fire before you saw it. The crackle was a voice, steady and patient, filling every corner with rhythm. It was there to feed the body, but also to calm the soul. And in its glow, warmth became something holy. The hearth sat in the centre, dug into the earth itself. A shallow pit lined with flat stones and ash that had known generations of hands. Smoke rose through a vent in the roof, curling through rafters like memory. It carried with it the scent of oak, pine and dried seaweed used as kindling. Every family knew the song of their fire, its rhythm, its pulse, its personality. They tended it as they would a living creature. Fire demanded respect. You could never take it for granted. Every flame was hard-won from flint and breath. In winter, when cold swallowed the horizon, the fire became sacred. It warmed the hands that held the world together, and it watched them sleep. They called it Elder, the fire. A word that meant more than flame. It meant life. It meant kinship. It meant the thin line between man and oblivion. Even the gods, they believed, kept their own fires burning in the halls of Asgard. The warmth of home was the echo of that divine hearth. At night, the fire's glow turned the longhouse into a temple. Its light trembled across the beams, painting faces in gold and shadow. The closer you sat to the centre, the more alive you felt. The outer edges were colder, darker, a reminder of how thin survival really was. Children drifted to sleep near the flame's edge, comforted by its breath. The fire's lullaby was their first and last teacher. Archaeologists who studied the house at Borg found the hearthstones polished smooth by countless winters. The blackened ceiling told the story of years without interruption. The same stones that had seen birth had also seen death. The same glow that lit a child's eyes had later lit their burial pyre. Fire was continuity, the thread tying every generation together. It was never just heat, it was heritage. In the sagas, there are moments when the fire itself becomes a witness. When kings spoke oaths beside it, they swore not to men but to flame. It burned truth into their words. To lie in its light was to call misfortune upon yourself, because the fire, they said, never forgot. Its smoke carried every secret to the gods. They didn't separate body from spirit, and warmth touched both. The body softened under its glow. The spirit did too. A tired man by the fire found his strength again, not through sleep but through stillness. That stillness, that listening, was part of their healing. They believed warmth was proof of divine favour. When it left, so did hope. The women of the household kept the fire fed through night and dawn. Their work was quiet, unseen, but everything depended on it. The sagas praise warriors, but they forget the hands that kept them alive. In every home, someone woke to stir the coals, someone listened for the hiss that meant wood had caught again, someone whispered thanks to Frigg for another breath of heat. Even their architecture guarded warmth like a secret. The longhouse was narrow by design, forcing the air to circulate close and slow. The rafters trapped the smoke, sealing in heat. The clay floor stored it through the night. Thick turf walls held it close. The earth itself became part of the house's lungs. The Vikings built homes that breathed with them. They knew the properties of every fuel. Birch for a quick flame, pine for long burning, driftwood for crackling light. Each log added a different scent, a different colour to the night. Even the ash had purpose, mixed into soap, medicine, and soil. Warmth was never wasted. It was a cycle, endless and perfect. The same fire that cooked their food cured their tools. The same smoke that blackened the ceiling kept insects away. They lived in harmony with what we now call pollution. Because every side effect was also a gift. Fire was not a thing to master. It was a force to serve alongside. That's why the fire pit sat at the exact centre. So everyone, from elder to infant, could see it. The glow reached every face. No one was left in darkness. Even the animals shared that light. Goats and cows lay in pens behind thin partitions, their breath steaming in the cold, their bodies adding warmth to the room. The scent of hay, smoke, and animal musk blended into something strangely peaceful. To live was to live together, every creature part of the same warmth. They didn't just warm themselves, they warmed their world. Each spark they fed was resistance against endless winter, each glow a quiet rebellion against death. And in that rebellion they found peace. Because warmth, like love, was only real when shared. To hoard it was to lose it. When sickness came, they turned to the fire first. It was medicine before herbs or prayer. They pressed frostbitten hands near the coals, rubbed warmth into the skin with animal fat and wool. The heat revived the body's trust in itself. The Vikings believed that recovery began where warmth returned. Even modern science agrees. Heat improves blood flow, eases pain, releases oxytocin, the hormone of comfort. That's why we still gather by firelight, why the colour orange feels like home. We're built for this, for the soft flicker of light against dark, for the hum of safety in the belly of flame. When the fire dimmed, they didn't panic. They rose in silence, knelt close, and breathed gently on the embers until they glowed again. That breath, slow, deliberate, was both prayer and science, a ritual that reawakened the heart of the home. To breathe life into flame was to remember life itself. Every house had one person known for it, the one whose hands could wake a sleeping fire faster than any other. They said those people carried elder in their veins. It wasn't just skill, it was soul. Some believed those born with fiery hair or temper were chosen by the hearth god, their duty to keep warmth alive through the storm. On nights when the wind roared down the fjord and shook the doors, families gathered close to the fire and listened to its voice. The flames danced, casting wild shadows that became gods and giants on the walls. Stories were born in that light, tales of creation, of Ymir's bones and Odin's wisdom. The children drifted off mid-story, lulled by the rhythm of myth and flame. Their dreams carried the same heat that glowed before them. The Vikings didn't see a difference between warmth of body and warmth of soul. Both were needed to survive. Both were gifts from the gods. They honoured them equally. And because of that, even in endless winter, they never felt truly cold. To us, warmth is a setting, a switch, a number. To them it was a relationship. It demanded attention, patience, and gratitude. They didn't complain about the cold, they answered it with devotion. That was the essence of their code. Even their word for home, Heimer, shared roots with world. To keep one's home warm was to keep the world alive. Every member was responsible. Every glow was grace. When they said, "May your fire burn bright," they meant, "May your life endure." When you step back, you realise their wisdom was simple. They didn't fight the elements, they cooperated with them. They didn't fear darkness, they filled it with light. They didn't seek control, they sought harmony. And through that, they found a peace modern comfort will never replicate. The fire taught them everything. If you could stand inside a Viking longhouse now, feel the weight of smoke, the soft heat of coals, the quiet breathing of those asleep under fur, you'd understand what we've forgotten. That peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's the warmth that follows it. Every log that burned was a lesson that light comes from consumption, that peace costs energy, that comfort is earned. The Vikings didn't hide from that truth. They embraced it. And in doing so, they found balance. If this warmth feels familiar, stay by the fire. The night is far from over. The next code begins where the fire meets the body. In the rhythm of sleep itself, the next rule of rest, the code of rhythm. The fire's warmth taught them stillness, but sleep itself, that was the rhythm. Not a schedule, not a number of hours, but a living pulse, older than the human voice. The Vikings didn't chase it, they lived inside it. It carried them like a tide, from light to dark, from breath to silence, from life to dream. Every creature in their world moved to that same ancient beat. The wind came in waves, the sea rose and fell like the chest of a sleeping god. Even the moon, their calendar, their guardian, followed a rhythm of vanishing and returning. The Vikings studied those patterns not with clocks, but with memory. They watched the sky, the shadows, the smoke from the fire. They knew when to rise, when to hunt, when to stop. They knew when to rest, because the world itself told them when. And the body, like the tide, obeyed. It wasn't obedience from fear. It was participation. They didn't rule time. They belonged to it. The word they used for time, timi, didn't mean minutes or seconds. It meant order, the natural sequence of all things. A cow calving, a frost melting, a child sleeping after milk. They measured time by the rhythm of necessity. And sleep was one of its sacred measures. We treat rhythm as routine, a set of alarms, a cage of hours. They treated it as communion. When the fire dimmed, they dimmed too. When dawn came, they woke not because they must, but because light called them. Their bodies mirrored the landscape. Their dreams mirrored the sky. Each season changed how they slept. In summer they rested in shorter bursts, twilight naps between labours, their bodies awake nearly through the endless light. But in winter, when the sun hid for months, their rest deepened into something near hibernation. Whole families drifting into trance-like peace, hours stretching like slow rivers of breath. This wasn't laziness, it was biology, perfectly tuned to latitude. Archaeologists studying bones from Viking-age graves found seasonal variations in stress markers. Bodies that worked hard in summer and healed in winter. Even their marrow shows it. Rest was built into their design. We've removed that balance, replaced it with ceaseless motion. But the code they lived by was simple. Work in rhythm, rest in rhythm. Their nights followed this law precisely. When darkness fell, it wasn't instant stillness. There was a sequence: fire, meal, story, silence, sleep. The rhythm carried them from one to the next, each step closing a door on the day behind them. Their lives were scored like music, and sleep was the refrain. Modern science calls it circadian entrainment, the synchronization of body and environment. They called it hell, wholeness. A word that means health, holiness, harmony. Because to them, rhythm wasn't about time management, it was about being whole. Every cycle completed meant balance restored. When they woke between first and second sleep, they didn't break the pattern. They flowed with it. The still hour was used for gentle work, for prayer, for intimacy. It was their way of acknowledging the middle, the space between light and dark, waking and dreaming. They didn't rush through that in between. They honoured it. That patience gave their lives grace. The sagas mention the hour of stillness, a moment when even the wind outside seemed to pause. Men sharpened knives, women wove cloth, but everything was done softly, almost reverently. It was as if the world itself exhaled, waiting to begin again. This is what we've lost, not sleep itself, but its rhythm. We fall into bed as though escaping battle, our minds racing long after the body begs for peace. We ignore the cycle until it breaks, and then we wonder why the dawn feels wrong. They never had that problem, because they never fought the pattern. Their entire culture reflected rhythm. Their poetry, Fauna Dislag, the old meter, pulsed in even beats like a heartbeat. Their rowing chants matched the tempo of oars and waves. Even the smith's hammer, the weaver's shuttle, the warrior's breath in combat. All moved in measure. It wasn't efficiency, it was harmony. They didn't separate labour from life or life from sleep. Every act was one part of the same eternal rhythm. You can hear it in their myths too. The gods themselves obeyed cycles. Odin's seeking, Thor's return, the seasons of Freya. Even Ragnarok, the world's end, was rhythm. Destruction followed by renewal. They trusted that what ended would rise again. So when night came, they let it take them. They didn't fear it. The darkness wasn't chaos. It was part of the song. They trusted that the same rhythm that made the tide rise would bring the morning. And so they slept. They never asked, "How much should I sleep?" They asked, "What does the world ask of me tonight?" Sometimes that meant long rest. sometimes a short dream between labourers. Their bodies were instruments, not machines. They tuned themselves by listening. In Icelandic folklore, they say you can still feel this rhythm if you sleep beside a fire, that the heart begins to slow in time with the flicker. That breathing deepens with the pulse of the flame. It's not superstition. It's the body remembering its origin, the rhythm of light and darkness, the code that shaped every ancestor before us. When you live without rhythm, life begins to fracture. You stop knowing when to wake, when to rest, when to heal. Your body forgets its seasons. Your mind becomes like a drum with a broken skin. No resonance, no tone. The Vikings never broke their rhythm, because they understood that peace isn't found in stillness, but in pattern. The longhouse itself was built to hum like a body in time. The air circulation through the smoke hole, the creak of beams expanding and cooling, the soft clink of cooling iron, the drip of melted snow from the roof. Each sound played in concert through the night. Nothing was ever truly silent. Everything breathed in rhythm. Even the snore of a sleeper or the shifting of an animal in its pen. It all joined the same song. That soundscape lulled them into trust. It was the symphony of survival. We live in mechanical rhythm now. Digital, fragmented, too precise to feel alive. We measure hours but not harmony. We chase productivity instead of peace. They, in their rough wooden halls, knew a deeper truth, that you don't control time, you belong to it. When the first light came through the roof vent, they didn't leap up. They stirred slowly like thawing ground. The rhythm of waking was gentle. Movement, fire, breath, voice. Each act flowed into the next. They didn't conquer the morning, they joined it. In that slow beginning they found power, because the world that starts quietly stays steady longer. They didn't separate waking from gratitude. To open your eyes was to say thanks. To rise was to join the great pattern again. To live was to keep time with the world. If you could hear it, that rhythm would sound like the sea. Endless, patient, impossible to resist. It's the same sound your heart makes when you finally stop running. The same sound a fire makes when the log catches perfectly. The same sound the north made when all was still and the longhouse dreamed beneath the snow. We like to think we've advanced beyond them. But maybe we've only gone out of tune. Maybe rhythm isn't something to master. Maybe it's something to remember. The Vikings didn't invent peace. They rehearsed it nightly. And the melody they followed is still playing. If you listen closely tonight, really listen, you might hear it beneath the hum of your own room. The faint pulse of ancient sleep. The steady beat of the fire still breathing somewhere in memory. That's the rhythm they lived by. That's the rhythm that kept them alive. If this sound feels alive in you, stay by the fire. The next code begins where rhythm becomes silence, where breath becomes calm and the world itself begins to hush. The next chapter of the Viking sleep code, the code of silence. Silence was not emptiness, it was a presence, heavy, alive, ancient. The Vikings knew it well. When the last ember sank into ash and the night swallowed sound, they didn't fill the void, they listened to it. Silence was their teacher. In a world without electricity, without endless voices, it was everywhere. The sound of the north was not noise, it was depth. Wind moving over fjord and pine. Wolves howling far beyond the settlement. The faint crackle of frozen rivers shifting under moonlight. That was the music of their world. And when they rested, it entered them. Silence didn't mean the absence of life. It meant the perfection of it. The longhouse slept in layers of sound, the soft snore of a child, the occasional creak of wood, and beneath it all, the pulse of the earth itself. It wasn't a void, it was belonging. They didn't fear quiet because quiet held them. Modern people call silence awkward, uncomfortable, even frightening. The Vikings called it peace. They lived close enough to death to know what real absence was. And silence wasn't that. Silence was survival after the storm, the breath after prayer, the sound between waves when the oars stopped. It was proof that life continued. Every longhouse had its own kind of quiet. In Iceland, where the wind screamed across open plains, it was a deeper quiet. one that lived beneath the constant roar. In Norway, near forests and waterfalls, the silence trembled with echoes. But it was all sacred. The sagas rarely mention silence directly, but you can feel it between every line. Before a warrior speaks, before a mother answers, before an oath is made, there is stillness. A pause that gives the next word weight. That pause was everything. They understood what we've forgotten. That meaning needs space to exist. That sound without silence is chaos. So they gave the night its rightful place. They let it breathe between their words, their actions, their dreams. When the house settled into darkness, they could hear things we've forgotten how to notice. The soft hiss of ash cooling, the slow drip of snowmelt on turf, the low murmur of sleeping animals. Each sound distinct, yet wrapped in silence. Their minds learned to hear what silence held. Every small noise became language. A sign that all was well, that the world outside still turned, that the gods had not withdrawn their breath. That was peace. Today, we drown in volume. We fear the gap between one sound and the next. We fill it with voices, screens, distractions. But the Vikings knew that silence wasn't a gap. It was the foundation. Without it, no story, no song, no rest could survive. The quiet was the world's original rhythm. Silence healed them. It slowed the heartbeat, steadied the mind, brought the body back into sync with the fire's slow breathing. Their nights were long enough for silence to do its work. It was their medicine, invisible but absolute. They trusted it to wash the mind clean. When winter snow buried their roofs and the wind howled for days, they withdrew into that stillness. It became their companion. In it they heard memory, the whispers of ancestors, the voice of their gods. The silence was not empty. It was inhabited. It was the space where faith lived. You can see traces of this reverence, even in their rituals. When offerings were made at the hearth, they were often made in silence. A pinch of grain, a splash of ale, a whispered breath of gratitude. Then nothing. Because silence itself was the offering. They didn't need music to feel divine presence. The hush of snow falling on the roof was enough. The sigh of fire turning wood to ash was enough. The silence that came when all words were spent, that was the closest thing to eternity. Their gods didn't need songs, they needed stillness. That's where they met them. When someone died, they kept vigil in silence. No wailing, no distraction. The family sat beside the body through the night, listening to the world breathe around them. To them, death wasn't a scream. It was a soft exhale. The silence after it was sacred. That's what silence gave them. Comprehension. A space wide enough to hold fear without breaking. They didn't chase noise to feel alive. They let silence remind them that they were. It wasn't isolation. It was intimacy with everything. Because when you fall quiet enough, the world starts speaking back. Even the animals knew this rhythm. Cows shifted softly in the dark. Dogs sighed in their sleep. Every sound folded into the hush. Nothing jarred, nothing intruded. It was the sound of belonging. We think silence means loneliness, but theirs never did. It was shared. The quiet was communal, a great calm that included everyone. Every soul resting under one roof, breathing in unison, trusting that no one outside would disturb the peace. That kind of trust gave their silence strength. It wasn't the quiet of emptiness, it was the quiet of unity. Each person a note in a greater chord, each dream another pulse in the same still sea. The longhouse at night wasn't dead, it was alive in a different way. Still, deep, whole. They believed the gods listened most closely to the silent. Those words could lie, but silence could not. The one who could sit with quiet was the one the gods favoured, because silence was the truth revealed, and truth didn't shout. It waited. It waited in the dark, patient as winter. Some of their stories begin in silence, a man sitting alone by a cold fire, a woman gazing into snow as the wind dies, a boy listening for something that isn't there. And then, from that stillness, vision comes. Silence was the seed of all insight. Modern researchers have found what they knew by instinct. 2 hours of silence a day grows new cells in the hippocampus. the brain's memory centre. Silence literally rebuilds the mind. The Vikings didn't measure neurons. They measured peace by how clearly they could hear their own thoughts. Their whole culture flowed between noise and quiet like breath. Feast and stillness, battle and rest, song and pause. Each gave meaning to the other. Without the quiet, life had no centre. When spring came and the ice began to crack, they didn't rush to break the silence. They let the sound of thawing water carry it away. It was a kind of farewell, the long hush of winter, leaving their bones, making room for laughter again. Even laughter was sacred because it rose from silence. They laughed easily, loudly, without guilt, but only because they knew how to be quiet first. Their joy had depth because it was rooted in stillness. Their rest had weight because it came after silence. That's what balance meant. We think silence must be earned, that peace is the reward for exhaustion. But they saw it differently. Silence wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The foundation on which warmth, rhythm, and life itself were built. They returned to it every night like a homecoming. When you listen to recordings of wind over the fjords today, you can almost hear what they heard. A vast, low hum, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. That was their lullaby. Not music, not words, just the sound of existence continuing. If you could hear it, really hear it, you'd understand why they trusted it. Silence was proof that the world was still holding them. It didn't need to speak to reassure them. The quiet said everything, and they slept beneath it, unafraid. Tonight, if you find yourself lying awake, turn off the noise for a moment. Listen. Let the quiet fill the room. You'll find it's not empty. It's alive. And somewhere in it, the north still whispers. If this peace feels near, stay by the fire. The next code begins where silence turns to vision, where the mind leaves the body and the world of dream opens. The next chapter of the Viking sleep code, the code of dream, the place where silence learns to speak. When they closed their eyes, the gods could speak. Sleep wasn't absence, it was a passage, a door without hinges, opening where no hand could reach. The Vikings believed that dreams came from beyond the self, from rooms the day could never enter, from voices the wind could not carry. They didn't treat dreams as curiosities, they treated them as counsel. In the morning the fire heard what the night had said. A father shared the ship he'd seen wrecked on a black reef. A mother spoke of a child walking safely along a strand of pale shells. A son whispered a raven's message he couldn't quite remember. The longhouse listened. Dreams were considered alongside weather and wound and grain. A single vision could delay a voyage, change a trade, save a life, or doom it. They feared the clarity of bad dreams, because the worst ones arrived perfect. Each symbol sharp as a blade, each face too near to deny. In those moments they believed Odin had sent warning, or fate itself had leaned close enough to breathe frost on the sleeper's cheek. But they also loved the gentler visions. A field green as spring, after a winter of sickness. A lost friend laughing by the old river stone. A door opening, and beyond it, warm light and bread. Those dreams were promises. Each one a thread thrown forward into the morning. They didn't separate spirit from sleep. The body lay wrapped in fur, the soul walked. Sometimes it crossed fjords and forests to meet the dead. Sometimes it climbed into the ash branches of Yggdrasil, and from there watched the 9 worlds glimmer like embers. When the soul returned, it carried ash smell and wonder back into the lungs. They had words for all of it. Svefen for sleep, Drauma for the visions, Mini for memory, the vessel that kept the dream from spilling, and True for trust, without which no dream could be heard without breaking. Language itself was a net for catching the night. At the centre of their dreaming stood the gods. Odin, who sought wisdom at any cost, was said to ride the winds that moved through sleepers. Frigg, keeper of foresight, and Home stood by the bed like a lamp no storm could blow out. Freya laid green over barren fields and over sorrowing hearts. Even Loki threaded mischief through nightmare's edge, sharp and cold. They told children that ravens carry messages to dreamers, that sometimes what wakes you is the soft brush of a wing, and what you remember is only a shadow of the feather's path. They taught them not to chase the wing, but to sit still and let it return. A chaste dream flees, an honoured dream lands. The architecture of their nights prepared those landings. Warmth low and steady, darkness complete, silence deep enough to bear the weight of vision. Bodies close, yet minds unstartled. A world arranged like a hand cupped around a small light. Dream was invited, not dragged. We have other names for the same country. We call it REM, sleep, paradoxical sleep. The nightly theatre where memories and emotions meet to settle their accounts. There, the brain stitches wounds no surgeon can see, tests futures without risk, and cleans the heart like a river cleans its stones. The Vikings knew the effects without the words. A good dream left you steadier. A true dream left you braver. A dark dream left you cautious, in a way that saved you. And a false dream. You learnt not to cling to those too tightly. They kept small charms by the bed, amber worn smooth by touch, soft twine knotted with a mother's blessing. A sliver of antler carved with 3 lines that meant safe passage. Not because magic overruled the world, but because symbols steady the mind, and a steady mind sails more gracefully into night. When illness burned through a house, the healer's first question was, sometimes, what did you dream about? Not to diagnose, but to measure the soul's weather. Was it trapped in a storm, or did it still find colour? They brewed sleep draughts with linden and hops and a kind of honey. They hung lavender, where smoke would coax its oils into the air. They laid warm stones wrapped in cloth along a fevered spine, and sang softly to slow the thoughts enough for the dream to approach. To them the dream was medicine, not a pill, but a path. They warned each other to keep salt near the bed at sea, to touch it after a nightmare, and remember the earth, to taste the world, and return to it. A sailor once said he'd seen the keel split in dream, and the next day the captain ordered the sail reefed before the squall. They limped home under a torn sky, spared by a margin of respect. Not all visions were warnings, some were visitations. An old woman saw her sister braid her hair again, fingers deft, voice like warm rain on sod. She woke up laughing and spent the morning singing the old song they'd shared. The longhouse felt lighter. A boy dreamed of a pale bear, leading him to a hidden stream in summer. Weeks later, thirsty and lost, he saw that same curve of rock, that same shimmer of alder leaves, and heard water under stone. He drank and carried the water back cupped in his shirt. For years he swore the bear walked beside him. Dreams gave them metaphors strong enough to last a lifetime. It handed them images that would not break under use: river, fire, wing, stone, door. With these they made choices, calculated risks. I accepted grief. They also knew the danger of dream unguarded. A mind cut loose by drink or fury might sink into visions that eat daylight, so they kept watch over each other. In the first days of a warrior's return, the family slept closer, breath steady, and counting the man back into the world. When nightmares shook him, a hand found his shoulder before words did. The body listens to warmth more quickly than it obeys reason. The fire was fed, the dream told. The wound escorted from the room gently as a stunned bird. They understood that dreams do not end at waking. It stains the day like wine on linen. It tints decisions, tilts attention, makes a man notice ravens or a woman notice the sea. So they spoke it aloud to lay it down where it belonged. Some dreams were considered too sharp for morning. A person carried one quietly for a while, letting it cool beside the heart, like iron beside water. Then when it was ready, they offered it to the fire. 2 sentences, maybe 3, and the flame took the weight. When a child woke crying from the dark, no lecture followed. Only this, tell me what you saw. The telling was the bridge back, the listening, the safe shore. If the dream was of darkness that chased, the elder might answer, turn and face it next time. Ask its name. If it was of water and drowning, look up for the moon. It shows the shore. They taught rules for sleeping courage most of us have forgotten. Don't stare into the flame too long before lying down. Let the eyes learn darkness gently. Don't argue in the hour after first sleep. You'll wound each other where the night can't heal it. Don't promise by morning what a dream told you in fear. Carry it to the fire first. They believed the world wanted to speak to them, and that sleep was the dialect their souls understood best. So they set conditions that honoured that speech. Simplicity of food at night, warmth that whispered safety but did not swelter, a roof where rain had a voice and silence had a home. In that chamber of care, dreams came clear and left gently. They did not tear the sleep at it, they stitched. They did not command, they suggested with a firmness that felt like love. Not every dream was trusted. They watched for signs of truth. The way a dream returns 3 times with the same shape, the way it arrives after silence rather than after noise, the way it makes a person kinder instead of merely frightened. Truth bears fruit by daylight. A farmer once dreamed his field burned white with frost in summer. He woke and set aside seed. When the storm came late and hard, he planted the saved grain and fed half the parish. He said nothing wise about it. He only tended the fire and slept as before. There were also dreams that asked for courage. A woman saw her husband swallowed by waves again and again, until one night she dreamed herself holding a rope. In the morning she braided a rope of her own hair into his belt. He laughed, but he did not drown that season. They kept the belt in a chest after, smelling faintly of salt and linden. A dream honoured becomes a story. Story told beside fire becomes custom. Custom practice becomes culture. And so the Vikings built a people who slept bravely, because they believed night spoke for life, not against it. We call that superstition. They would call our fear of dream a kind of poverty, a refusal to speak the oldest language we know, because the body is ancient, the mind is older than speech, and both remember that night as their teacher. If you wake in darkness and do not know why, don't turn away, don't flood it with light. Let the room remain a little wild. Ask softly, "What did you bring me?" You may not get an answer you can write down. You may only feel something loosen its hand from your throat. You may see a face you needed to forgive, or a door you're finally ready to open. Sometimes the gift is small, like a name you'd forgotten to say out loud. When morning comes after a true dream, even the air tastes different. Bread seems warmer in the hand. The road to the barn feels shorter. You're kinder to the one who speaks first. You lift the latch as if it too had travelled with you and returned. If this world of dream feels near, stay by the fire. The next code begins when the body learns to make medicine of night. When warmth, breath and scent become a healer's hand. The next chapter of the Viking sleep code, the code of healing, where rest remembers how to mend. Healing began long before medicine. It began in stillness, in warmth, in faith. The Vikings didn't separate the body from the night. They believed sleep itself was a healer, a sacred repair the gods had written into flesh, and every night they offered themselves to it. They didn't have hospitals or sterile rooms. They had fire, herbs and hands, the hands of mothers, wives, healers, strong, deliberate, steady as the tide. In the silence between breaths, they listened for what the body was trying to say. They believed illness wasn't invasion, but imbalance, a disharmony between warmth and cold, light and shadow, spirit and bone. To heal, you had to return to the code of the earth, and that began with the fire. The longhouse healer, often a woman called Leknir, learned how to read the flame like scripture. If it hissed sharply, the patient needed calm. If it burned low, the patient needed strength. Fire wasn't a symbol, it was a diagnosis. The glow told her when the body's heat had gone missing. The Vikings understood fever not as an enemy, but as a burning out of impurity. They let the body do its work, supporting it with rest, with patience, with warm broths of lamb bone, leeks and thyme, with furs that held the fire's echo through the coldest hours. They placed stones in the embers until they glowed, then wrapped them in wool and laid them by the feet or along the spine. The stones released slow, deep heat, not scorching, not harsh, but the kind that seeps into marrow. You can feel the echo of it even now in the comfort of a warm bed. Their word for health, hill, meant wholeness. A healed person wasn't simply alive, they were complete again. To be unheil was to be split from one's rhythm, to have the night out of tune with the body. The cure wasn't always herbs or poultice. It was restoration of rhythm, warmth, belonging. When a person was sick, they didn't sleep alone. The community drew closer, not away. They shared body heat. They told soft stories, sang, breathed in rhythm beside the ill. Because warmth wasn't only temperature, it was presence. And presence, they believed, called the soul back to its seat. A body in fever drifted near the line of death, and the Vikings didn't fight that drift. They stood vigil with patience. They trusted that what must burn away would burn, and what must stay would return with the dawn. Faith was as much a remedy as any herb. Their healing herbs still grow in northern soil. Angelica, valerian, yarrow, mugwort. The same scents that drifted through smoky halls now fill modern tinctures and teas. They steeped them in warm ale or milk, poured them through linen, and gave them to the sick not just as medicine, but as hope. They saw the body as a vessel of God's intent. To mistreat it was sacrilege. To heal it was worship. A healer spoke quietly to the flesh, as though to a friend returning from a long journey. She reminded the patient of the world waiting for them. The warmth, the fields, the sound of morning. Sometimes when nothing else worked, they turned to ritual. They carved runes for protection, algies for defence, urus for strength, sowilo for the sun's return. These weren't magic tricks, they were languages. The runes helped the mind picture recover, and the mind, when it could see life again, often found its way back. They used water from sacred springs, not for its purity, but its memory. Water that had survived frost and thaw, that had travelled through rock, carried a strength humans could borrow. They poured it over wounds while praying in silence, letting the sound of trickling water weave with the crackle of the hearth. The two together, fire and water, symbolised balance restored, because in their cosmology, all healing came from balance. Too much heat could wound as deeply as too much cold. Every cure walked the edge between extremes. Their healing songs were slow, half breath, half melody. You can find fragments in Old Norse charms, words to calm bleeding, to ease childbirth, to soothe madness. They were sung not in command, but in care, because sound itself carries vibration, and vibration reminds the body that it is still one piece. A woman in childbirth was surrounded by such songs. Her pain wasn't banished, it was witnessed. Firelight danced on the faces of those who kept vigil. Warm towels, herbs, water, and whispers filled the space. They said the goddess Air, divine physician, stood beside the mother then. Every life born into that light entered the world through rhythm and care. The night after birth was the holiest silence of all. Mother and child swaddled, the hearth kept low. The air is thick with milk and smoke and soft breathing. No one spoke loudly. The Vikings believed the newborn soul listened for the world's tone, and the tone you set that first night shaped their courage forever. Healing to them wasn't recovery from illness. It was the maintenance of harmony. The same code that governed their fields, their seasons, their fire governed their sleep. A person who worked against the night would fall sick in spirit. One who honoured it would stay whole. That's why the healer always asked, "Have you slept well?" Because to sleep well was to be right with the world. To fight sleep was to invite disease. Modern science agrees. In deep rest, the body rebuilds its immune shield. The heart slows to repair its walls. The brain cleans itself of sorrow. We measure these things with machines. They measured them by morning. If the patient woke without fear, without heaviness, if their first breath was steady, the healer nodded and said, "You are returning." That was enough medicine. They didn't chase eternal youth. They pursued endurance. A healed man was one who could rise again to the cold and smile at it. A healed woman was one who could sing again after silence. They carried their scars as proof that fire and frost had both shaped them. They didn't need perfection. They needed rhythm restored. When fever passed, they gave thanks not with words, but with action. Wood was chopped for another's fire. Food was shared with those still weak. Healing created obligation, not debt, but gratitude turned into service. Because in a world that is fragile, one body's health belongs to all, and all health belonged to the fire. Even dying had its healing. The healer stayed until the last breath, making sure the soul left in peace, the fire still burning beside them, warmth guiding them into the next hall. Death, too, was a kind of rest. Their wisdom was simple. You cannot heal by force. You must yield to the process that made you. Fire, sleep, silence, rhythm. Each one a medicine. Together they rebuilt what winter and war tore down. That was the code of healing. If you close your eyes tonight, and the warmth of your room feels steady, and your breath falls into rhythm with the dark, you're already practicing it. The body remembers, it always has. If this peace feels close, stay by the fire. The next code begins where healing becomes harmony, where the body and world move in one pulse. The next chapter of the Viking sleep code, the code of balance, the art of living in rhythm with everything. The Vikings understood something that science would take 1,000 years to prove, that healing doesn't begin with herbs or prayer or sleep. It begins with contact, with the warmth of another heartbeat, with skin against skin, and the quiet truth that no one survives alone. Touch was not luxury, it was medicine. Mothers wrapped their infants under layers of fur, pressed them against their own bare chest through nights so cold that even the fire trembled. A child's body learned the world first through warmth, and that memory became their lifelong armour. Every Viking was raised with that imprint. To hold, to be held, to share body heat was sacred. They called it likamr samr, the together body, a state where two people could share not just warmth, but energy itself. In the longhouse, this was not romance, it was survival. Bodies slept close, shoulder to shoulder, children between parents, elders at the edge. Dogs curled near the feet to guard and give heat. When breath misted in the dark, it mingled. When one shifted, the others adjusted without thought. It was a choreography of care, unspoken, instinctive, a nightly reaffirmation that belonging was stronger than the cold. Even their beds were built for it. Wide planks, shared coverings, fur piled thick enough to hold the weight of 5 hearts. In that closeness, peace was born. Touch soothed more than flesh. It eased grief, calmed fear, and reminded every warrior what they were fighting for. When a man returned from battle, his first act was not feasting, but embracing. To be touched again was proof he still lived. Women carried that power quietly. They knew how to heal with hands, how to lay palms over fevered brows, how to press oil into aching limbs, how to trace runes of comfort on a wounded back. There was a wisdom of contact, not distance. The healer's hut smelled of pine, ash, and skin. There were no sterile barriers, only human presence, steady breath, and faith that the body could remember wholeness. If reminded gently enough, they massaged joints after harvest, bathed warriors in warm animal fat to soften bruises, washed infants in milk and honey to protect the skin from frost. They touched without shame. They understood that to touch was to acknowledge existence. To ignore was the real wound. Even animals carried that ritual. Horses were brushed not for vanity, but to transfer calm between creature and keeper. Cattle were patted at dusk to quiet them before storms. Contact was covenant. Every gesture told the world, we belong together. At sea the rule was simple. Never sleep apart when the wind howls. Men huddled under shared cloaks, their shoulders pressed close, breathing in rhythm with the ship. The warmth of another body meant one more chance to see land. Archaeologists found traces of this closeness in graves. Husbands and wives buried hand in hand, mothers and infants turned toward each other even in death. The living understood what the dead already knew. Connection outlasts flesh. Touch carries memory beyond breath. They believed the gods themselves worked through contact. Frigg's blessing was given by hand upon the head, Thor's protection by the press of a hammer to the chest, Odin's wisdom by a hand laid over the eyes. Each gesture transferred power like spark to tinder. Every bond was sealed through touch. To strike in battle was also a form of connection. They didn't fight at a distance. They looked into the eyes of those they struck, because even in violence there was recognition. A grim awareness that all life was one body, and pain was only its conversation. The code of touch demanded balance. A touch could heal, or it could harm. To touch with anger poisoned both giver and receiver. to touch with reverence cleansed them both. The difference was intention, and intention was everything. At night, when the fire dimmed and silence thickened, a single hand reaching across the furs could steady a racing heart faster than any prayer. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. That contact said what words could not. You are not alone. Modern science now speaks of oxytocin and nervous systems, but the Vikings lived it. They knew that the body, when touched with care, slowed its pulse, deepened its breath, and allowed the spirit to unclench. That was their medicine, and it worked. Touch was their language of faith. They didn't speak often of love, but they practiced it constantly. In the shared meal, the gentle bandage, the shoulder leaned upon. Love wasn't confessed. It was applied daily, like warmth to skin. When plague or loss came, people gathered around the afflicted. They did not isolate them. They held hands as fever took hold, believing the soul could feel its way out through another's palm. Death was faced in company, never alone. This made their grief beautiful, because when a body fell still, its warmth remained on another's skin for hours. That lingering touch was proof of connection unbroken. They let it fade slowly, as if the body itself was teaching them to let go. In that lesson they found peace. The gods had given touch as both anchor and release, to hold tightly when life demanded endurance, to open gently when it demanded acceptance. This was the rhythm of all things, the pulse of creation itself. In our time we've forgotten the simplicity of contact. We speak more, touch less. We scroll through faces we never hold. We dream of connection through light, not warmth. But the body still longs for the truth it once knew. It waits for a hand, not a signal. The Viking sleep code reminds us that healing begins not with solitude, but with closeness. To rest beside another, to breathe together, is to remember that existence itself is shared. No one heals alone, and no one ever did. So if you find yourself restless tonight, lay your hand over your own heart. Feel the heat beneath your skin. That is the oldest contact, the proof you are still here. The gods are near enough to touch, and the fire that lives in you answers to their warmth. The first sleep code was not about technique. It was about tenderness, the knowledge that every living thing wants to be known by touch, that life, when shared, becomes bearable, and that even in the deepest dark, one hand reaching for another can keep the world alive. The Vikings believed the world was built on tension, fire and ice, chaos and order, life and death. But they also believed balance wasn't found in choosing sides. It was found standing between them, steady as stone. Everything that lived did so by this fragile harmony, and sleep was its deepest expression. To them, balance wasn't a philosophy. It was survival written into every breath. They saw it in the tilt of the seasons, in the way day gave to night and took again, in the way flame consumed but also preserved. They didn't chase control. They honoured equilibrium. Each night was a negotiation between warmth and cold, too much fire and the air choked with smoke, too little, and frost crawled into lungs. So they learned to read the room like the weather. A mother adjusted logs, a child pulled straw tight against the draft. The longhouse existed at the mercy of both extremes. Its builders knew how to shape that mercy into order. The roof pitched just enough to catch heat, the vents cut to release it slowly, the walls breathing through turf and moss. Nature itself was a partner, not an enemy. Their word for balance, vegi, meant even weight, but its root carried another meaning, fairness. Balance wasn't static, it was moral. To hoard warmth when others froze was a kind of sin. To rest while another worked too long broke the rhythm. So balance became duty, not comfort. Every family had its share of the night to keep. A man might wake at the middle, watch, add wood, check the animals, then sleep again knowing another would rise before dawn. Even rest was shared. That's how communities survived, through balanced trust. They balanced labour the same way they balanced flame. Work hard, yes, but never past exhaustion. Eat heartily, but not to excess. Speak boldly, but not with cruelty. They believed in balance invited the gods' correction. And correction often came as a hardship. Their myths taught this better than any law. Odin's quest for wisdom required blindness to vanity. Thor's strength was tested not in rage, but restraint. Even Loki, chaos itself was necessary, because without trickery, the world would stagnate. Every force needed its counterforce. They learned that peace wasn't a lack of danger. It was the art of standing calmly between dangers. That's how they treated the sea. Never conquered, never avoided, always respected. They watched the tide's pulse and found in it their own. In sleep, the same law ruled. Rest too much, and the mind grew dull. Rest too little, and the body betrayed itself. The Vikings lived by observation, when the birds fell quiet, when breath fogged heavier and cold, when the body asked for stillness. They listened. Balance governed everything from diet to dream. They mixed cold fish with hot broth. They alternated heavy work with still evenings. They feasted, but they fasted too. Not from shame, but renewal. They treated deprivation as purification. Archaeologists studying Norse settlements found this pattern etched in refuse heaps. Weeks of rich bones followed by simple grains, cycles of indulgence and restraint, the rhythm of a people who trusted hunger to sharpen gratitude. Their health depended not on abundance, but on the wisdom to pause. Modern life calls that moderation. They called it reverence. Because to live in balance was to live as the gods designed. Excess meant arrogance. Deprivation meant neglect. The centre was grace. You can feel that balance in their architecture. The longhouse wasn't beautiful by accident. It curved with the wind, faced the morning sun, let rain run off without stealing heat. It didn't resist nature. It moved with it. Inside, even the way they stored things followed that same pattern. Dried meat above the hearth, close enough to smoke but not to scorch. Water barrels sealed near the door where the air stayed cold. Furs hung where heat could chase away dampness. Every object had a place according to balance. It was an order that made them free. Their entire cosmos was built on this principle. At its centre stood Yggdrasil, the great tree. Its roots drinking from shadows, its branches lifting into light. 9 worlds balanced upon it, each one needing the others to stand. The Vikings didn't think balance came easily. They believed it was work. Daily, deliberate, sacred. To keep peace inside meant holding equal space for strength and mercy. To rest well means forgiving the day before closing your eyes. Because resentment, left untended, burned hotter than fire. It broke the code of the night. When anger lived too long in a man, he couldn't sleep. They knew this long before psychology had a name for it. A guilty heart tossed beneath the furs, eyes open to darkness, mind racing toward no dawn. The healer might tell him to walk into the cold, to let the frost bite his thoughts clean. Then return, kneel by the fire, and sit in silence until his breath matches the flame. That was how you cooled the mind. That was how you restored the rhythm between body and spirit. Balance was therapy without words. Even their justice aimed for balance, not punishment. A life taken required reparations, not only revenge. A feud ended when both sides restored symmetry. A gift, a payment, a truce sealed by shared drink. It wasn't mercy, it was equilibrium, and peace always grew from it. Their women practiced another kind of balance, domestic, emotional, divine. They carried flame and silence together. They spoke little, but their influence steadied every home. When a man left to raid or trade, the woman's presence kept the hearth alive, and that steadiness echoed in his sleep, even across oceans. Balance for them was invisible architecture. You didn't see it, you felt it. It made the long nights livable, the harshness survivable, and the soul is able to rest even when the body aches. It was the quiet between storms. Modern life swings like a pendulum, excess to exhaustion, noise to numbness. But their world moved like a tide. It returned, it replenished. Even death wasn't the end, only another balance. Life paid back into earth, warmth returned to air. That's why their funerals burned so bright. The pyre wasn't destruction, it was restoration. flame-carrying flesh to sky ash-feeding soil, the circle closing cleanly. They saw beauty in that equation. To them, balance was truth. And truth, like flame, didn't argue. It simply revealed. They didn't write books about it. They lived it through repetition, through every sunrise and ember and shared meal. Each act an offering to equilibrium. At night, balance returned as peace. Bodies evenly spaced, fire glowing steady, the room breathing as one. No guilt, no striving, just the sense that everything had done its part. That was enough. When they lay down, they didn't beg for rest. They accepted it. Because rest wasn't earned. It was part of the design. They had learned to trust the circle, to surrender to balance, to let the night complete the day's unfinished work. If you stand in their ruins today, you can still feel it. The silence layered in air, the geometry of survival. Each post and beam still knows its place. Each stone remembers warmth and shadow. Even the earth, holding centuries of ash, hums softly with rhythm. Balance never dies, it only waits to be noticed. If this steadiness feels alive in you, stay by the fire. The next code begins where balance deepens into belonging, where warmth and memory entwine. The next chapter of the Viking sleep code, the code of memory. Where rest becomes remembrance. Every night, as the fire dimmed and shadows lengthened along the beams, the Vikings didn't just sleep, they remembered. Their rest was not forgetfulness, it was communion. Because to them, memory wasn't a thought, it was a presence that lay down beside you. When a Viking closed his eyes, he didn't fall into isolation. He entered a circle of kin, of ancestors, of stories that refused to die. They lived surrounded by memory in every shape, in the blackened roof timbers that had absorbed decades of smoke, in the worn edges of wooden bowls passed from mother to daughter, in the sound of a cradle song older than the language itself. They had a word for this, mini. It meant more than remembrance. It meant the living continuity between past and present, a bridge that never slept. To have mini was to carry the breath of one's people in the lungs. To forget was to become hollow. Each night the fire retold that lineage without words. The crackle of the logs echoed voices long gone, and the rising smoke carried those memories back into the rafters. The rafters themselves were witnesses. Darkened by years of storytelling, each plank soaked in the breath of the dead. The Vikings didn't keep libraries. Their archive was sound. It was the rhythm of their speech, the repetition of their sagas, the way a father's tone lived on in his sons. Stories weren't performed, they were inherited. Every retelling was an act of resurrection. In winter, when the wind walled them in for months, memory became the only proof that the world still existed beyond the snow. They sat around the fire, each person holding a piece of history. The elders began with Sva Va Tha. So it was then. And the room fell silent. Children leaned closer. The sagas weren't entertainment, they were preservation. Names carried weight because to speak them was to keep them alive. A man who died unremembered was said to die twice, once in body, once in word. To sleep after hearing your ancestor's name was a sacred act. It meant you carried them into the dream world, keeping them from fading. They remembered everything, triumphs, losses, debts and loves. But the memory wasn't sentimental. It was a duty, a burden and a blessing that shaped their every action. To forget kindness was shame, to forget betrayal was folly. Even their gods lived inside memory. Odin's greatest treasure wasn't his spear or his throne. It was the well of Mimir, whose waters held the wisdom of the dead. He gave his eye for a single drink, because to know was to remember. Each home mirrored that cosmology. The hearth was their own Mimir's well, a place where warmth and story met. When the flames burned low, the glow itself seemed to shimmer with ghosts. The ancestors were never gone, only quiet. Archaeologists at Oseberg found wooden carvings buried with two women, a serpent winding into a knot, a ship carrying souls into light. These weren't symbols of ending, they were maps of continuity. The Vikings believed death was a curve, not a cliff, and sleep was practice for walking it. They spoke often of dreams where the dead appeared, a father giving advice, a lost brother smiling by the shore. a mother brushing hair from her child's eyes. These weren't considered hallucinations, they were visits. The dream world was porous, and memory flowed freely between sides. To dream of an ancestor was to receive instruction. If the dream was peaceful, it meant approval. If troubled, it meant unfinished duty. To ignore such a vision was to invite misfortune. So they listened, even to silence. Their memorial rituals reflected this reverence. The blot, a feast for the gods and the dead, was less about grief than gratitude. Ale was poured into the ground, meat shared across generations. The living and the departed dining together in spirit. They toasted till minis to remembrance. Each drink a vow, you are not forgotten. And they believed that as long as memory remained, the dead walked in the warmth of the hearth. Not as ghosts to fear, but as roots feeding the tree of life. They didn't see time as a line, but as a circle. Every birth mirrored a death. Every death returned as renewal. A child named after a grandparent wasn't a tribute. It was continuity embodied. The soul returned through the name, a fire relit with the same spark. To forget was the only true death. That's why the skalds, the poets, were held as sacred as warriors. They wielded no sword, but they preserved what swords could not defend. Through their verses, memory survived famine, plague, and empire. Their words became eternal hearths. The Vikings' sense of self came from these stories. A person without ancestry was a person without anchor. When strangers met, they asked not, "What do you do?" but "Whose are you?" Identity meant lineage, and lineage meant memory alive in flesh. In their homes, memory wasn't confined to thought. It was tactile. Every surface carried history. The knife handle smoothed by 3 generations. The scar on the doorpost where a boy once tripped and bloodied his nose. The pattern carved into the loom by a woman long buried. Nothing was replaced if it still held meaning. We call that sentimentality. They called it belonging. To hold what was once held by the dead was to affirm continuity, a physical thread between breath and ash. Even the soot was sacred. The soot told time. The deeper the black, the older the life within the wall. And yet, in that darkness, there was comfort. They knew that the fire's smoke would one day stain another roof, and that their lives would join the same cycle of warmth and decay. That's what it meant to live inside memory. When they spoke of Valhalla, they weren't describing a distant heaven. They were describing remembrance itself. To be chosen by the gods was to be remembered forever. Your name sung at feasts, your deeds spoken by firelight. Immortality was nothing more than perfect memory. Even the sea, to them, was a memory. It held the bones of the lost, and when they sailed upon it, they believed those souls stirred beneath the keel. The waves whispered names, and every splash of salt was a reminder that nothing was truly gone. They trusted memory more than faith, because faith could waver, but memory endured. They didn't pray for eternal life. They worked for eternal remembrance. And they achieved it. Not through monuments, but through rhythm, through story told again and again. We spend our nights trying to forget, to silence the mind, to escape what lingers. They spent theirs remembering, because remembrance to them was rest. To forget was effort. To remember was peace. Their silence at night wasn't emptiness. It was a conversation with the past. Each breath they took completed a sentence begun centuries before. Each heartbeat echoed one that had stopped long ago. That continuity made them fearless. It made them eternal. Even their sleep mirrored this philosophy. When they lay down, they rested beside their dead. Graves were often built near homes, sometimes even beneath them. The earth underfoot was a second longhouse, a darker hall for those who had gone ahead. The dead weren't banished, they were neighbours. The living tended the graves like gardens. In spring they placed flowers or trinkets there. A ring, a cup, a carved spoon. In winter, snow itself became the shroud. Everything alive was part of remembrance. Their faith didn't need written scripture. Their proof of eternity lay in the continuity of flame, of story, of name. When the first snows fell, and the night stretched endless, they didn't dread it. They saw it as a chance to listen. to let the past speak again through firelight. If you walk through Scandinavia today, through forests where longhouses once stood, you can still smell that faint, sweet tang of ash and pine, hear the echo of voices in the wind. That's the persistence of memory. Long after names have faded, the Vikings knew that memory is the truest immortality. It asks for no temples, no idols, only attention. Each night we remember, we rejoin the circle. Each story told keeps the fire alive. Each breath is an ancestor's echo. And maybe that's what rest truly is. Not escape, but return. Not oblivion, but recognition. They didn't sleep to forget. They slept to remember what mattered, to wake renewed in gratitude for what I endured. If this memory feels warm within you, stay by the fire. The next code begins where remembrance becomes trust, where peace is no longer built but surrendered to. The next chapter of the Viking Sleep Code. The code of trust, the final threshold before renewal. Trust was the final code before renewal, the invisible bridge that carried them across every night. Without it, warmth meant nothing. Silence meant nothing. Even the memory of the gods could not hold them if they did not trust. Because sleep itself is the greatest act of faith. The Vikings understood this. Every evening when the fire burned low and the wind moaned through the walls, they lay down knowing the world could end before morning. A storm could break the roof, a raid could come down the fjord, a sickness could sweep through the hall. Still, they slept, because they trusted the night. Not as safety, but as order. A rhythm older than fear. To close your eyes was to surrender control. And they believed surrender was not weakness, but wisdom. Each person in the longhouse trusted another to wake before dawn. Someone always rose to feed the fire, to check the door, to whisper a small prayer to the gods. Their rest was built on the certainty of care. To sleep deeply meant trusting that another heart would stay awake. That's what made their communities unbreakable. Not just the sword or shield, but shared faith in each other's watch. When one rested, another guarded. When one grew weary, another took the burden. Their lives depended on this pattern, and so did their peace. It's easy to imagine their nights as fragile. But the truth is that trust made them indestructible, because faith in the unseen gave them strength that daylight could never teach. Even when the dark pressed close, even when the wolves howled across the fjord, they believed the gods watched the door. Their word for trust, true, meant more than belief. It meant alignment. To live in true was to live in harmony with truth itself. Faith wasn't blind, it was participatory. You proved it by action, by letting go when the night arrived. Trust in their world was the opposite of control. The farmer could not command the frost, the sailor could not order the wind, the mother could not forbid her child's fever, but each could trust. That balance would return, that the gods remembered them. They didn't need constant reassurance. Their faith lived in the small gestures, a log added to the fire, a whispered, "Good night." A hand resting on another shoulder before turning away. The ordinary rhythm of care. When danger came, trust steadied them. The warrior slept the night before battle because he believed fate had already been decided. Worry was useless, only courage mattered. A mind at peace fought better than one ruled by fear, so they trained not only their bodies, but their hearts. To rest without panic was the mark of true strength. Even their ships were acts of trust. Each plank bent perfectly beside the next, held together not by nails but by faith in craft and man. When they sailed into storms, they trusted the sea as much as the vessel. They knew it could take them, but they also knew it carried them. That dual awareness, danger and reliance, is the essence of Viking trust. To trust something capable of killing you. To sleep under a roof you built with your own hands, knowing wind and fire might still undo it. To live anyway. Their myths reflected this duality. Odin's self-sacrifice upon Yggdrasil, hanging 9 nights to find the runes, wasn't endurance of pain, but surrender to it. He didn't conquer wisdom, he trusted the tree to reveal it. That was divine rest, faith in the unseen order of things. Frigg, goddess of foresight, lived in the same faith. She saw what was coming, her son's death, and still chose to love. Her trust wasn't ignorance, it was courage in the face of certainty. The Vikings modelled their peace on that same devotion. To live knowing you will lose, and love anyway. Trust made sleep holy. It was the single moment of the day when they stopped fighting the world, when they handed their fate back to the gods. No prayer could match that surrender. It was faith expressed through stillness, a kind of quiet worship. We try to rest without trust. We deadbolt the doors, silence the alarms, and still wake to invisible threats of our own making. But they rested without locks, without glass, without guarantees, because they believed the night itself was sacred, that it carried them through, not over. Their communities were woven from that belief. No man survived alone. A mother trusted her neighbour to watch her children. A widow trusted the smith to mend her tools. A chieftain trusted the farmer's loyalty more than his weapon. And because that trust was real, the whole world felt smaller, safer. In the glow of the longhouse, trust took form. Each person knew their place, not hierarchy, but harmony. The youngest fetched water. The oldest whispered blessings. Between them lay peace. It was enough. At sea they sang to keep faith, rowers chanting not only to keep time, but to drown the fear of waves. Each oar dipped into the same rhythm, a kind of mechanical prayer, proof that unity could quiet even the storm. To the Vikings, faith wasn't abstract. It was tangible, sensory, daily. You could smell it in the smoke, feel it in the hearth's heat, see it in the eyes of the one keeping watch. Trust was as physical as breath. It lived in motion, not belief. They also absolutely trusted the cycles of nature. The long dark, they knew, always yielded to dawn. The frost, no matter how deep, always melted. The body, no matter how wounded, could mend, if given time. That pattern never lied to them, so they built their peace around it. When they prayed, it wasn't for miracles, it was for alignment. They asked to walk in step with the truth of things, because peace didn't come from control, it came from participation, to live in tune with the song already playing. Trust transformed their fear. They didn't see death as an enemy, but as a companion. Every day they trained for it, not in combat, but in sleep. Each night was a rehearsal for the final surrender, and each morning a resurrection. When a loved one died, their faith didn't falter. They believed the soul's path was sure, that no one vanished into nothing. The body returned to earth, the breath to air, the warmth to the eternal fire. The fire itself became their metaphor for divine trust. It is consumed and created in the same act. It was destroyed, yet preserved. They fed it without fear, knowing it could turn on them, because to live with fire was to live with truth. It demanded honesty and reverence, nothing less. When two people quarrelled, they were told to sit by the same fire until it forgives you, meaning remain together until warmth returns. That was their justice system in miniature. No written contract, no witness, just shared flame. If you could sit beside someone long enough to feel peace again, the matter was settled. That's how they built marriages, friendships, and alliances. Through shared presence, not promises. Trust wasn't spoken, it was experienced. It was knowing the fire would not go out, knowing another would wake when you slept, knowing that life would resume when the sun returned. Trust was their antidote to chaos, because chaos thrives on fear, and fear can't live where trust is rooted. Even their sagas end not in certainty, but in return. The world remade from what was lost. Our modern hearts still crave that certainty. We measure, monitor, analyse, and yet feel no safer. But they, who slept with wolves at their door, found peace in surrender. They trusted because they had to. And in that necessity, they found wisdom. They didn't see faith as a gift, but as a practice. Each night they trained for it. Each surrender was rehearsal for the next. That's why they slept without fear of death. Because they died and were reborn a little every night. That rhythm was their immortality, To live like that is difficult in our age of control, but maybe trust isn't gone. It's only buried. Under light, under noise, under the illusion that we are alone. The Vikings remind us we never were. The night is still the same. It's still waiting to hold us. If you've forgotten how to trust the dark, remember them. Those who slept through storms, who feared nothing they could not see, who believed the fire and the gods were watching, even when they closed their eyes. Their faith was not naive, it was inherited. To sleep as they did, you must believe that the world still keeps its promise, that the same force which spins the stars can guard your breath for a few hours more, that nothing is lost by letting go. That trust, not strength, carries you through the night. That is the final truth of the old code. And so as dawn approaches and the last embers glow, remember, the world does not ask for your vigilance. It asks for your surrender. The fire will keep its watch. The gods will finish your prayer. You have done enough. If this faith feels alive in you, stay by the fire. The last code begins where trust becomes transformation, where sleep becomes rebirth and night becomes renewal. The final chapter of the Viking sleep code, the code of renewal. There was a moment in every Viking night, a fragile silver pause when the darkness began to loosen. Not yet morning, not yet day. The fire was low, the air still cold enough to bite the breath, and in that quiet half-light, something sacred stirred. They called it Dogun, the coming of dawn. To them, dawn was not an hour. It was a being, a spirit that returned faithfully, even after the longest winter. It crept across the sky like a promise kept, and every creature that had endured the night lifted its head to greet it. The Vikings treated that moment as renewal itself. They did not rush toward it. They watched it arrive, first as a faint blue glow behind the mountains, then as a thin blade of light cutting through the smoke hole, spilling over the sleeping faces and the embers' faint pulse. It was as though the gods themselves were exhaling. Each morning was an act of mercy. To survive the night was proof of favour. The people stirred slowly, reverently, as if waking might frighten the light away. Someone always rose first, the firekeeper, the guardian of warmth. They were the first to greet the day. That greeting was simple. A breath, a word, a prayer. Not to ask, but to thank. The Vikings didn't begin the day with demands, they began it with recognition. That the world had returned, that balance had held, that life for another day was still theirs to tend. They believed dawn was a threshold, the hour when dreams and reality touched hands. The mind still half in the other world, the body is just beginning to remember its weight. That's when visions were clearest, and omens easiest to read. If you had dreamed of someone who had passed, that hour was when you whispered their name, because dawn, they said, could still hear both sides of the veil. It was the hour of forgiveness, when spirits reconciled and even the gods softened. The soundscape of dawn was its own language. Crows first, raw ancient calls echoing over frost. Then the crackle of a rekindled fire, a soft footstep on wood, the shuffle of wool and breath, the beginning of another life. Those who lived by the sea knew dawn differently. They saw it arrive over water, the horizon slowly bleeding gold into the waves, the mist lifting like breath from the mouth of the earth. Fishermen often pushed out at that hour, believing dawn blessed their catch. Farmers greeted it with equal reverence. They opened the barn doors, let the first light touch the backs of animals, and believed that act alone guarded them from illness. Light was medicine, and dawn was its first dose. They knew too that the light came slowly for a reason. If it returned all at once, it would blind. If it never came, the world would die. So it came as the gods intended, gradual, patient, teaching mortals how to endure change. The lesson of dawn was moderation. Many homes had their own small ritual. A bowl of water placed in the open air overnight, then brought inside at first light. It was called Morgenvatten, morning water. Families would wash their faces in it, to cleanse not just the skin, but the dreams. They believed water caught the spirit of the night, and returned it purified at sunrise. Children laughed as the cold touched their cheeks. Mothers whispered prayers of protection, and fathers quietly looked toward the horizon, measuring the weather by colour and wind. Dawn was also when vows were made. Marriages, oaths, and journeys began at first light, because the gods were thought to listen most clearly then, when the world was half asleep, and lies had not yet formed on the tongue. Truth belonged to the morning. Those who broke promises made at dawn were said to lose the sun's favour. It was not superstition, it was accountability. Dawn heard everything, it remembered, and it revealed. The old poets sang of Dellinger, the god of the dawn, whose light could not be hidden. He was the father of the day, the herald of beginnings. And in his silence, all things learned to rise again. He was proof that no darkness was permanent. The Vikings marked the seasons through dawn as well. In winter it came late and pale, a cold, quiet friend. In summer it barely left, lingering on the horizon as though the gods themselves refused to sleep. That rhythm shaped their minds. It taught them patience, taught them to live in cycles, taught them that the long dark always passes, but not through force, through faith. We think of dawn now as automatic, an event of physics, not spirit. But to them it was alive, a covenant renewed daily. To see it was to witness the world forgiving itself. To greet it was to join that forgiveness. They never separated dawn from fire. Both were resurrections of light. The hearth's glow and the sky's glow were part of the same story. The same eternal flame returning in two places at once. One inside, one above. Even after a night of grief, dawn could not be ignored. No matter how much had been lost, the world still rose. And so must they. It was mercy, but it was also a command. The elderly spoke of dawn as a friend who always kept their word. A companion that never missed an appointment. Even if your strength failed, even if your eyes could no longer open, the light would still arrive. To remind you that the world continued. In their faith, the soul too had its own dawn. After death came a kind of light rising, the spirit's release into the morning of eternity. They saw the afterlife not as darkness, but as the sun rises in another world. They called it Andlat, the letting go of breath. That belief made their mornings softer. Each sunrise after a burial felt like a message that the one they loved had crossed over to their own dawn. The living and the dead still shared the same rhythm. Two worlds waking together, each in their own kind of light. If you stand now where they once stood, a field of frost, a cliff over the sea, the first warmth brushing your face, you'll feel it too. The same pulse, the same quiet awe. The ancient covenant is still intact. Dawn doesn't ask for worship, it asks for witnesses, to look up, to breathe, to be alive enough to see another beginning. That was their first and last prayer. And that's what the Code of Dawn means. That every light deserves reverence, every beginning deserves stillness, and every heart deserves one more chance to rise. They didn't fear the night because they knew this truth. The morning always remembers. When you wake tomorrow, don't rush to the noise. Wait, listen. Let the slow return of light fill the room. That silence is the same one they once breathed. That glow is their fire coming back to you. Because dawn doesn't belong to history. It belongs to all who endure the night. And when it touches your face, it's the old world greeting you again. Whispering through the light, you've made it. When dawn finally came to the Viking world, it did not rush. It crept softly. A pale band of silver across the snow, a sigh through the smoke hole, a low hum of frost melting from the roof. The first light didn't command the world to wake. I invited it. Every living thing seemed to rise at the same pace. The cow shifting its weight, the child turning under a fir, the man drawing breath and remembering his name. That was renewal. Not rebirth in thunder or glory, but the quiet return of life to motion. The Vikings knew this rhythm better than anyone. They didn't believe morning erased the night. They believed morning completed it. Rest and action were one body breathing. Sleep didn't escape. It was a cycle of repair. And each dawn was proof that the world had kept its promise. They rose with gratitude, not haste. The first act was always tending the fire, not to restart it, but to thank it for surviving the dark. A few small logs, a stir of ash, a whisper to the gods. Thank you for the warmth that waited. They never took morning for granted, because in their world, survival itself was grace. To wake meant the long night had chosen mercy. So each sunrise was holy. Every breath in that light was a prayer, and renewal was the language it spoke. Their mornings were slow rituals of return. Hands thawed beside the flame. Bread warmed on stone. The taste of smoke and honey mingled with the cold. Children blinked at the light, as though seeing it for the first time. And outside, the ravens began their chorus. That sound, harsh, eternal, was a signal that the balance held. The same ravens that carried dreams at night now carried news to the waking. Odin's messengers reminding the living that they had work still to do. But work did not begin with a frenzy. It began with renewal of body and mind. The Vikings stretched as they rose, unhurried, deliberate, as if testing the new day for its truth. They moved like people who knew that time itself was sacred. Modern life begins in noise, the alarm, the screen, the rush to resume struggle. But their mornings began in rhythm, the same rhythm that had carried them through the night. That continuity protected them. It made every day a continuation, not a collision. They didn't divide rest and labour as opposites. One gave birth to the other. To rest well was to work well. To work well was to rest without guilt. That loop kept their spirits steady. That loop was their survival. You can see this code in their artefacts. The worn handles of tools, smooth as river stones. The rhythm of use and care. The blacksmith's hammer hung precisely where his father's had hung. The loom thread still carries the tension of songs once sung beside it. Even in what they left behind, renewal continued. The cycle was everywhere. Fire to ash, ash to soil, soil to grain, grain to bread, and then back again to fire. Life was a perfect circuit, and death was not interruption, but return to origin. That belief shaped their courage. Because nothing that ended stayed gone. Everything fed something else. A fallen tree became warm. A broken tool became metal reborn in flame. Even sorrow became a seed for understanding. They built their religion around this truth. Ragnarok, the end of all things, was not an apocalypse in despair. It was a renewal at divine scale. The gods fall, yes, but the earth rises again from the sea, clean and bright. That myth mirrored their daily lives. Every night was a small Ragnarok, the body's surrender, the mind's descent into darkness. And every morning a small rebirth. The code of renewal wasn't fantasy. It was the deepest pattern of existence. They didn't fear decay, they embraced it. Wood split, clothes frayed, skin scarred, but each sign of wear meant life was still moving through them. They mended, not replaced. They honoured endurance over novelty. Even their sleep held this philosophy. When they lay down, it wasn't to escape exhaustion. It was to become new again, to let the world rebuild them in silence. They trusted the process completely, because every morning of their lives had proven it true. The healer's last instruction to the recovering was always the same. Sleep until you feel the earth beneath you. That meant wait until your body remembers balance. Don't rise from fear of idleness. Rise only when warmth fills your chest again. That was the sign of renewal. We think renewal means transformation, a grand turning of fate. But for them it meant returning to simplicity, to eat, to breathe, to tend the fire. No miracle beyond that was required. Life's perfection was already present. It only needed tending. Renewal, they believed, also belonged to the soul. Each night burned away a layer of old fear. Each dawn revealed what was left. A quieter, steadier self. The one the gods had intended before the noise began. Sleep was their purification. There's beauty in the humility of that. No sermons, no ceremony. Just the rhythm of breath and the faith that night will pass. It's what kept them human in a world of chaos. They never demanded comfort, only continuity. Renewal also lived in forgiveness. To sleep while angry was to invite sickness. They learned to let the embers of resentment die with the fire. Each morning they greeted even enemies with clean eyes, not because hatred vanished overnight, but because they refused to carry it into the new day. Forgiveness was not softness, it was survival. A heart full of bitterness could not rest, and a sleepless soul could not fight. So they chose release. They left yesterday to the dark and stepped into dawn unburdened. This is what made their courage so enduring. They didn't conquer fear, they shed it nightly. They didn't demand peace, they built it from repetition. Each cycle of sleep and waking was a forge for the spirit. Every morning they emerged tempered, stronger, quieter, more alive. Even aging was renewed. An old warrior's scars became instruction. A grandmother's stories became armour for her descendants. Nothing faded without purpose. Even their wrinkles, their grey hair, their worn hands were proof of lives well spent in rhythm with the world. They had no word for retirement, only for legacy. You did not end your work, you passed it onward. Your strength became someone else's warmth. Your memory became someone else's compass. That was how eternity worked. Renewal was not just physical, it was cosmic. They believed that every fire fed the sun, that every breath joined the wind, that every dream contributed to the pattern of creation. You were never apart from the whole. You were part of its restoration. To wake then was participation in a miracle. You became again the living proof that the world keeps faith. The frost thawed because you stirred. The smoke rose because you breathed. The light returned because you opened your eyes. And in that simple act, all of life began again. When they stepped outside after long sleep, their boots sank into snow that glowed like crushed stars. The air bit the lungs and gave back clarity. Each inhale a baptism, each exhale a release. That was their morning prayer. To live like that is to live awake. Not restless, but aware. Aware that you are the continuation of every life that came before. Aware that the world renews itself through your survival. The Vikings didn't separate faith from flesh. Renewal was both. We've lost that understanding. We chase new instead of renewed. We burn through ourselves as though the night has no purpose. But the Vikings knew better. They built their peace by honouring endings. They built their strength by trusting the return. And maybe that's what this code teaches best. That every night holds resurrection in disguise. That no darkness is final. That to rest is to rebuild. That the body knows how to begin again. If only you'll let it. So when you lie down tonight, don't see sleep as surrender. See it as the world's oldest covenant. The fire keeps its watch. The night does its work. And you will rise renewed. They called this Near Daga, the new day. Not in celebration, but in gratitude. Because the sun had risen again, and so had they. And all that was left to do was live in rhythm with the light once more. If this dawn feels close, stay by the fire. The circle is complete now. Warmth, rhythm, silence, dream, healing, balance, memory, trust, renewal. The old codes still breathe in your bones. You don't need to learn them. You only need to remember. Rest well tonight, child of the north. The fire is waiting. The circle closes now. The night that began with weariness ends in peace. You've walked through warmth and silence, through rhythm, dream, healing, balance, memory, trust, renewal. Each code has been a door, and behind each the same truth waited, that rest is not weakness. It is the body remembering how to belong. We think of the Vikings as iron-hearted and battle-scarred, and they were. But beneath the rage of their sagas lived another kind of strength, the quiet endurance of those who knew how to stop. Who knew that to face the world's chaos, you must first know how to lay your sword down? And that peace, not war, was what made survival divine. Their greatness was not in conquest alone, it was in recovery. They knew how to rebuild after fire, how to rise after loss, how to keep the flame of life steady through the long dark. We still carry that skill, buried under centuries of noise, and the night still waits to teach it back to us. Close your eyes and listen. The wind, the faint hum of the world outside your window, the pulse in your chest that's older than any city. That rhythm is theirs. That peace is what they mastered. The same darkness they faced still holds you now, because this is what the old codes really say, that the world is alive and it remembers you. It has watched every generation sleep and wake, and still it offers the same promise, that no matter how hard the day, the night will hold you. The Vikings didn't pray for calm seas, they prayed for courage to trust the tide. They didn't pray for long life, they prayed for worthy rest. And they didn't see death as an end, but as the final return to the fire. You can almost see it. The last embers glowing in the hall, smoke curling like silver ribbon through the roof vent, the slow exhale of a world at peace. Outside, frost glitters across the earth like scattered stars. Inside, warmth still hums. Someone turns in their sleep. Someone breathes out and the air turns to mist. And above them, the gods keep their silent vigil. The same scene repeats through centuries. Every longhouse, every family, every heart that dared to rest. That's the fire that never dies. So when the world feels heavy, when your mind will not quiet, remember this. You are part of an unbroken rhythm. You were built to endure the dark because your ancestors already learned how. Their strength wasn't in the swing of their axe, it was in their stillness. Their ability to lie down and trust the night. To do what only night can do, to heal, to rebuild, to renew. That is the forgotten art of living. Let the fire fade, let the silence return. You've done enough for one day. There is wisdom in rest, there is courage in surrender, and there is eternity in the simple act of breathing. So breathe, rest, and remember, you're not the first to feel this tired. You're not the first to seek peace in the dark. But you are part of the same story. The one that began beside a fire 1,000 years ago. That story still burns here, in the glow of every screen, in the hum of every quiet room, in every person still searching for calm. The Viking sleep code was never lost. We only forgot how to listen. Now you've remembered. Carry it with you. Warmth, rhythm, silence, dream, healing, balance, memory, trust, renewal. 9 codes. 9 lessons from the oldest nights in history. All of them lead here, to peace. If this story has steadied your breath, then take it with you into your own nights. Let it guide you to stillness. Let it remind you that the fire is still burning, that the gods are still watching, and that sleep is not the end. It's the beginning again. So rest well tonight. You have earned it. And when you wake, carry this rhythm into the light. The world is waiting for you, renewed. The fire never really goes out. Even when the last ember fades, even when the longhouse stands empty, and the wind has taken the roof somewhere, beneath the ash, beneath the soil, a single coal still breathes, waiting for someone to find it again. That's how the Vikings saw life. Not as a straight line from birth to death, but as a flame passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, each one tending it for a while before the next took over. A single unbroken light moving through time. We are part of that same fire. Every time we rest, every time we remember warmth, we continue the work they began. We don't need furs or wooden walls to live their code. The same darkness that surrounded them surrounds us. The same dawn still comes. They believed that fire was both God and teacher, that to sit beside it was to sit before creation itself. Every flicker spoke a truth, that even destruction can illuminate, that even death can give light, that even silence burns when seen with reverence. Today our fires are smaller. The blue glow of a screen, the pulse of a lamp behind glass, the faint hum of electricity where wood once cracked. But the instinct is the same. We still gather around light to remember who we are. Our world has grown louder, brighter, and colder. We have warmth without silence, light without darkness, and comfort without rest. We no longer hear the voice of the flame, but it still whispers, if you let it. Close your eyes and listen to your room. The radiator ticking, the faint rhythm of your own breath, the heartbeat against the pillow. It's not so different from the sound of the longhouse. Stillness wrapped in life. The fire is waiting for you there. Not in the past, but in the part of you that remembers the rhythm of the old world. The part that still knows when to stop, when to breathe, when to trust the night to hold you. We were not made for endless light. We were made for the balance between glow and shadow. The Vikings knew this. They didn't try to conquer the dark, they befriended it, and in that friendship they found peace. Maybe the lesson they left us isn't about history at all. Maybe it's about returning to the original pattern of being, a life that burns but does not rush, that rests but never forgets to rise, a life where every day ends as it should, in warmth, in silence, in gratitude. Modern science has started to rediscover what they already knew. That deep sleep rebuilds memory, that silence repairs the brain, that warmth calms the heart's rhythm, that community keeps the body alive longer. We've proven with data what they practiced with faith, but data cannot comfort the soul. Only rhythm can, only surrender, only the old trust that the world still turns, with or without your striving. The same trust that let them sleep while wolves sang outside. The same trust that could still save us. Imagine for a moment you lived then. No phone, no light beyond the fire, no clock to warn you the night was half spent. Only breath, warmth, and heartbeat. Would you really be afraid of the dark? Or would you remember what it feels like to belong to it? Because that's what they understood. The night wasn't against them. It was for them. It was the world's way of calling them back from exhaustion and saying, rest now. The earth will keep turning. And they listened. We forget to listen. We drown the message in noise and light. We say we're tired but refuse to stop. We call stillness laziness, silence discomfort, and sleep a guilty luxury. But the body remembers. The body remembers the longhouse, the rhythm of shared breath, the comfort of fur and fire, the peace of knowing you don't have to hold everything together alone. That memory lives in the oldest part of the brain, the part that still trusts the dark. When you close your eyes tonight, that part will stir again. It will remind you that nothing requires your vigilance, that you are carried by the same rhythm that carried them, that the fire is still burning, and that you are safe. We call this nostalgia, but it's more than that. It's a genetic memory, a cellular recognition of peace. The Vikings didn't invent calm, they tuned into it. They lived in rhythm with the turning of the sky. Every inhale was a prayer, every exhale a release. If you could watch them sleep, the slow rise of the chest, the soft orange light tracing faces and beams the stillness between each breath, you would see not warriors or raiders, but children of the night utterly at home. They didn't fear death because they practiced it every evening, and every morning they were resurrected, each cycle proof that the gods had granted one more chance to rise, to work, to love, to fight, to rest again. Renewal was not earned, it was gifted, and they accepted it with humility. You can do the same. You don't need their fire, only their willingness to be human. To let yourself stop, to honour the darkness that restores, to remember that peace was never lost, only forgotten. The fire waits for all of us, not as a symbol, but as truth, a light that existed before language, that will exist long after the last word fades. Every night it waits, patient as history. Every morning it forgives. There is no secret to resting. There is only this return to warmth, return to silence, return to trust, and you will find the rhythm again. Because what they discovered under the northern sky was not mythology. It was the blueprint of life itself, and it has never stopped burning in us. It burns in our need for comfort, in our yearning for quiet, in our awe at the first light of dawn. You've heard it in the crackle of your own thoughts, felt it in the weight lifting from your chest when the world slows down. That's the fire calling you home. It has waited through centuries of noise and disbelief. It's still waiting, and it will wait as long as it takes. So let the world spin without you for a while. Let the night do its work. You are part of something vast and ancient. The fire knows your name. It has seen every face before yours, and it knows you've done enough. Rest now. You are safe. You are warm. You are remembered. And the fire that waits for you is already burning within you. If you felt the fire tonight, keep it alive. Subscribe to Viking Times and join us again by the hearth. Tell us in the comments, which city's night are you watching from? Until next time, rest well, traveller of the North.